Hi, my name is Adam Didyk, SA Performance Coach for Athletics Australia. Today we'll be talking with Craig Mottram, one of the legends of Australian distance running, who has now ventured into coaching. For those of you who don't know Craig, he has an amazing set of statistics with Australian records in the mile of 3:48.98, 2,000 metres, 4:50.76, 3,000 metres, 7:32.19, 5,000 metres at 12:55.76, and a couple of road records to go with it. He also went to 4 Olympic Games, starting in Sydney, then going to Athens, Beijing, and finishing up in London. Craig, welcome to our interview here. Today, we're keen to speak to you about obviously your time as an athlete, but also what you're doing now as a coach.
Thanks, Adam. Good to be here, and I look forward to sharing some of my experiences and thoughts on the questions you've got lined up for me.
Excellent. So, I guess probably one of the most determining factors of what you were like as an Australian athlete was, I was looking back at some of your Australian championships, the 5,000 metres, where you won 6 of them, placed on a podium a couple more times. But I think one of the things, being an athlete of that time myself, not one that was anywhere near your standard, but the winning margin, it ranged from 8 seconds to 27 seconds. And I guess from that, I'm sort of wondering from you what you believed your key attributes were, and what it took for you to go from being a leading national level runner to then competing internationally.
Yeah, that's a broad question to start with, but I think I'll begin to answer that by saying that the Australian Championships was always something that I wanted to do every year. Obviously, if you want to be one of the best in the world, then I think representing your country in the domestic season by performing well locally is very important. And you want to be the best in Australia. I wanted to be the best in Australia every year that I was running, not just in the 5,000, but in other events. Obviously, I wasn't as successful in the shorter or longer distances, but I think one of my strengths was frequently coming and competing in Australia. I mean, when you get overseas and you do these international races, often a lot of them are set up in regards to the time and the pace and the strategy around how they're going to be run. Something like the national championships in Australia and the domestic competitions here is about learning the skill of racing, and figuring out how to roll on the fly when you're in those situations. And some of my more stressful races throughout my career are actually run here in Australia domestically against some of my competition in my own backyard, because being the best in Australia was one of my major priorities throughout my career. I always wanted to be the best I could be here in Australia. So coming up against some of our younger talent coming up in Australia always made me a little bit nervous and excited. So I think representing my club at the local level was really important. And you mentioned the 8 seconds to 27 seconds, whatever the difference is in winning margins throughout those championships, I think is a really good reflection on the level of competition that we had, but also the way in some of those races had been run. So obviously the shorter the winning margin, the more tactics involved. I think one of those national championships I broke in that scenario, in that event. So it was depending on what I was trying to get out of it, to be honest, but the priority was always to win those championships. But I think to answer your original question, my strengths was my competitive nature. I think one of my biggest assets was I didn't like to be beaten, and I would always try to find a way to win in competition. And that would, depending on what the time of the year was or what the race was, my strengths would change. So sometimes I was faster than other times of the year, depending on where we were at. So it was always making sure that I competed to my strengths at that particular point in time. And for the bigger championship races, you would work on particular things, whether it was closing speed or strength in the last K, rhythm, whatever it might be, the assets that you think you needed in that championship race. So your strengths change. Everybody's strengths change throughout their career. But I always fall back on my biggest one, which was my competitive nature.
Yeah, excellent. Had one of the questions from sent into Athletics Australia was, do you have any PBs or times that you have run unofficially that people don't know about? And, you know, I look at your stats and there's no 800 PB, no 400 PB. Is there any thoughts around that as to what you feel you could have potentially done at those distances or did in training?
Well, yeah, obviously there's lots of things that you do in training that doesn't get recorded. And I think Well, one of those examples was after the 2005 World Championships. I think most people that know about my career and running probably heard this story, but I ran an 800 time trial at St Mary's College during a training session. So I did, I think from memory, I'd have to go, it was 10 200s off 30, so on a minute cycle. Did them in flats, then I put spikes on. Ran an 800 time trial, ran 1:45.9, and then took the spikes off, put the flats back on, and did 5 by a mile. And so, look, I think I never ran an 800 competitively at any level. Anyway, it wasn't my event, and I wasn't really built for that sort of style of racing. But if I had to, I could run it quick. But then keeping in mind that was just me versus the clock rather than any other tactics or strategy involved in that. So I think to compete in the 5K and the 1500 and the mile, you've got to have ammunition across multiple events. And I think, I don't know what my 400 PB was, but I knew at the end of a 5K, if I had to, I could run 52, 51 maybe to finish out those events. So speed endurance is always there. Even in some of the longer event groups such as 5 and 10K, they can still close. I know the 10K at the Olympic finals, they're running in 51, 52 seconds for the final 400. So it can often be easier to run faster at the end of a 10K than it is at the end of a 1500 because you're potentially not as anaerobic or full of lactic that you might be in something like an 8 or a 15. So lots of records, the TAN record in Melbourne, obviously, which is official, but wasn't set on an athletics track, obviously. So, but those things that you can talk about off the record, I suppose. Yeah. And the older you get, the better they were, Adam.
Yeah, my PBs weren't good enough to improve. So I'm looking forward to what yours are in 10 years' time. Looking back on your career, what stands out as your highlight? I know that when I've been fortunate enough to sit in the stadium for your 5,000 at the Commonwealth Games here in Melbourne, as well as Kathy Freeman's gold medal at the Sydney Olympics. And the sound of the crowd on those two nights is incomparable to anything I've ever experienced. Did something like that sort of stay in your memory as an outstanding sort of part of your career, or were there other races that just you felt like you got it right that stand out more so for you?
I think there's two parts to the answer of that question. Obviously, you mentioned Com Games and Olympics and things like that. They stand out in your mind for the environment and obviously the circumstance and the situation you're in. So you remember those. And if I was to pick one major championship, which I remember the most, it was because it was at the MCG. I was living 400 metres away and it was literally in my own backyard. So that's an experience that I'll never, ever get again. And it was phenomenal. I ran really well. I did everything I could in that and I'm really happy with how that sort of championship played out. But then there's obviously the World Championships in 2005 where you do things that, you medal in something like that, which has a lot of history behind it, a lot of importance to sort of things. So it depends what it is that you're using to justify the answer, I suppose. But there's the major championship. But then for me personally, there's also, just as I've already spoken about, the local domestic competitions that you're racing against guys that you're training with locally, and you have that banter back and forth, that real competitive part of racing, because I think it's really important to keep that competitive nature in your local environment. So I think in 2012, I qualified for my 4th Olympic, and that was hard, but I was able to qualify and do things off very limited preparation. I'd had very up and down time previous to that. I prepped for that. So to be able to come out and pull off that result, personally, to me, was one of my better runs.
Craig, looking back on your career in the final stages, you sort of were hampered with a bit of an Achilles injury. How did you maintain a performance focus during those times?
It's a good question, and it's certainly an area that I get asked a lot in regards to dealing with injury, and in our business at the moment, that's a big area. But I was always a glass half full kind of person. So I think when you get injured, it's your body telling you that something is wrong. And what it's providing you is an opportunity to work on other areas. So for me, you mentioned my Achilles. I battled Achilles for the second half of my career, from sort of 2006 all the way through to 2016 really, when I finished up running a marathon in London. But what it did allow me to do, obviously managing the injury and getting specialist treatment and all that sort of stuff to overcome the physical nature of that injury, but what it did allow me to do was set up a life outside of running. It made me focus my attention on other things, because running can be all consuming. So when an injury like an Achilles or something like that can threaten your career, it makes you really think about what other things you want to do in sport and in life. So injuries for me were always a challenge, because I wanted to run, but then I'd always flip it around and look at it and say, well, what can I do with this injury that's going to make me a better athlete and a better person? So that Achilles injury, came, as I said, in that latter part of my career. So I was able to focus on recovery from that, but also what I was going to do outside of my running career, and look at things like coaching and business and other various bits and pieces, as well as set up the new coaching relationships that I wanted to make in my own career and everything else. So injuries are tough. We understand that. But I think it's about looking at what the injury is telling you. Maybe you need to change the way you move. Maybe you need to change your loading, those sort of things. But also, what do you need to change about your lifestyle that's going to help accommodate this injury and make things going forward a lot smoother and more enjoyable for you?
Yeah, and you just touched on something there in regards to lifestyle. I think there's a lot that could be said and discussed with athletes when they sort of look at their training and how they become better, and they're just ultimately focused on looking at how they do their training, what training they should be doing, and those sort of things. And there's always a lot of questions about that. How would you sort of summarize your sort of line of thinking in regards to how you have to be an athlete rather than just do the training?
Yeah, look, I think I'm looking back now, hindsight's a wonderful thing. When I was an athlete, I was very focused on being just an athlete. I was very lucky in my career that I was able to be full-time. I had the sponsorship deals and everything else that allowed me to just focus on running. But in saying that, I did finish university, did 2 university degrees and other various bits and pieces. And I think my best performances came when my life was well balanced. And by that, I mean, I was focused on my running, but I also had other things that were just keeping me in check, whether it be university or work experience, relationships were going well, and all those sort of things. So I think we know a lot more now than we did when I was running back in from 2000 to 2012, really, in regards to well-being, athlete well-being and balance in life. And I'm watching that Michael Jordan documentary at the moment, which I'm sure most people are, The Last Dance. And it's fascinating to see some of the things and some of the lengths he went to just to try to get away from sport and the pressures of sport when he was at his height, back in the 80s and 90s, in regards to he loved playing his golf and all those other social elements that came with his lifestyle. So I think it's really important, and we're talking more from a coaching perspective now than me as an athlete, but to understand the athlete and what they need to be balanced and happy. Because at the end of the day, that's where you're going to get your best performances. And I didn't always get it right as an athlete. There's absolutely certainty in that I made a lot of mistakes in regards to being too focused, too drilled, and too aggressive at things throughout my career. And, as I've already said, I think some of my best results came when I either had a holiday or come back from injury, believe it or not, because you allow your body to rest, you change your focus, you switch off, and you're not so worried about getting everything done exactly to the letter. And we talk about 1%ers and things like that, but they can often mean more outside of running than the actual training itself. So getting that balance right and focusing your energy in the right area at the right time is really important.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And you sort of, you pushed onto what my next question is going to be is, at the moment when you realized that you were going to retire from your running, how did you sort of cope with that? We've seen a lot of that through Michael Jordan's Last Dance documentary. And how did it face you, and how comfortable were you with the idea?
Oh, look, I was ready. I was probably ready in 2012 to finish up, but I got sort of not coaxed back into it, but I wanted to run a marathon. So that sort of lured me back into running for another 3 or 4 years. But to be 100% honest with you, at the end of, even prior to the marathon in 2016 when I ran in London, I knew that if it didn't go well, that was it. If it did go well, then I'd push on and run in Rio. But I was very happy to finish up with my running. I think a lot of athletes and coaches say your mind is willing, but your body isn't, in regards to when the time is right to retire. I actually think it's the other way around. I think your body is always willing if your mind is. And for me, my mind had moved on. I got 3 kids now. I had 2 kids at that time. We were running our own business. I think I was pretty lucky. After 2012, I was able to find work, get a job, and actually experience life beyond just running. So start that transition early. And if I can sort of give any advice to athletes that are in the thick of their careers at the moment, is don't underestimate the difficulty of transitioning from being an athlete into life outside of sport. It's not an easy, smooth transition, and you've got to expect that things don't come as easy as they may well in your career. And the sooner you can start that process, the better. You don't have to be a full-time athlete to the day that you retire. You want to start that transition throughout the latter part of your career, so that when the time comes, you're comfortable in making that step. And I think for me, I was really lucky in doing that. And I knew when I was running down to Buckingham Palace in London that was it. That was the last minute of my running career, and I was very happy with that when it ended.
Yeah, excellent answer. So leading into your coaching, how did you sort of come about starting your coaching, and what was sort of the decision process in allowing yourself to go down that pathway?
Look, I think I started coaching much like what I was talking about in the previous answer. I probably started coaching while I was still running. I had a new group. I built a new group in 2010, 2011. And a lot of the athletes that I was training with were younger development athletes that would travel around, well, in a position to travel with me to various parts of the world, to Flagstaff and things like that, to train. And I took them under my wing in regards to helping guide them and become more mature athletes and educate them on why we were doing things and stuff. And I wasn't their coach at that point by any means, but I think I had that sort of coaching mentor relationship with a lot of those athletes. So I'd started that transition into coaching before I even finished up my running career. And from sort of 2015, 2016, I started actually taking a commercial coaching role, if you like. So I was working within the school system here in Melbourne, in Victoria, and taking coaching positions within schools where I was working with cross-country teams and middle distance groups with their track and field, APS, AGSV, athletic seasons and things like that, and really enjoying working with the younger athletes. I didn't really have ambition to be a high-performance coach where I was coaching, athletes wanting to represent Australia. I really just enjoyed the enthusiasm of working with the younger athletes at an age where I could have an impact and make a difference. So for me, that transition into coaching sort of happened naturally, I suppose, through leading a group of young athletes and setting up my own group as a senior athlete, and then transitioning into just coaching within the school system here and really enjoying it. And obviously you get some of those athletes become senior athletes, and then they go on and compete at state and national level. And then as the group and the environment grows and the nature of what you're creating becomes positive, it attracts other athletes that want to be a part of it. And I still use the same philosophy. We talk about some guiding principles in what we have with our group, that we trust each other, we buy into the program, and we have really good communication and a strong bond within that training environment. And I think if you can create that, the coaching itself is almost secondary. The actual structure of the training programs and all that sort of stuff, you can go onto Google, Adam, as you know, these days, and you can get a 12-month plan on how to run a 5K or a half marathon. It's not so much about what's written in the plan, it's about how it's delivered and the relationships you make. And for me, that transition started as an athlete, working with other athletes that were in my group and building those relationships. And we've just carried those over into our coaching philosophy and our group now.
Very, very good answer there, because it's often misunderstood with coaching, how that relationship's often the key driver to that, and the training and things sort of really complement that. You had some really experienced coaches guide you throughout your career. You start off with Bruce Scriven, you then sort of worked with Nick Beddoe, and then finished your career with Chris Wardlaw. What are some of the attributes from those coaches that you've probably kept in your coaching these days and learnt from them that have sort of helped you be successful what you're doing now?
Yeah, look, I'll break it into the three different coaches, I suppose, throughout my career. And starting with Bruce, he sort of entered into my career when I was 18 and 19 and injected a really fun level of enthusiasm for the sport of athletics. He's got a great group of junior athletes, still is coaching down in Geelong where I grew up with junior athletes, and he has a really strong relationship with those athletes, and you create a bond with Bruce, I think, that lasts a lifetime in regards to understanding of why you're doing things, how he's delivering it, and you trust him and he's always with you. So I think that from that perspective, my relationship with Bruce as an early coach really helped me fall in love with the sport of athletics and that coach-athlete relationship, and how it's important to have that bond. And then moving on to that sort of Melbourne track era, which was more the high performance element of my career, I suppose. I learned a lot about the logistics of setting up a season, training, being the philosophies and physiology and all those other various bits and pieces behind training. So that was more focused on getting maximum result for the work that you were doing. And then Chris Wardlaw, I moved to him sort of in 2010, 2011, in the second half of my career. And that sort of taught me about the independence of being a senior athlete. One of Chris's quotes early to me was, "A good coach is redundant." In other words, that we should be educating our athletes on why they're doing things, and understanding the reason behind this, and then how to structure things. So Chris was more of an educator for me. So I suppose, to summarise, Bruce taught me the love of athletics and how to build a strong relationship with a coach. Melbourne Track Club taught me the performance element of what's required. And then Chris taught me about maturing the athlete and educating the athlete in regards to what's required to be a good athlete and a good coach. So I've been really lucky that I've had such a diverse range of experiences throughout my career, and I wouldn't have done it any other way. I often get asked, is there anything that I would have changed throughout my career in regards to coaching and stuff like that? And to be quite honest, I think I got everything out of myself, and the relationships I had, albeit up and down throughout my career at various times, that was the way it went. And I think I was able to maximise everything throughout my career for the better. And I'm very grateful for that.
In going on from that, how have you sort of found your coaching has evolved? You talked about initially just having athletes who you sort of mentored and then took them under your wing and sort of got into a coaching sort of role with them. Do you look back on when you first sort of probably more formally started coaching and sort of go, oh, geez, I wouldn't do that, or now, or you've sort of evolved your concepts or your approach to things, or you've learnt through your interactions with athletes over that period to then continually improve?
Yeah, I think it's the learning process is huge. As it is as an athlete, you're constantly evolving. One of the biggest challenges I had moving into that coaching space was understanding that my way wasn't always the best way for all of the athletes. I'm quite strong-minded, and I was certainly that when I was an athlete. But understanding different ways of communicating and different ways of training, and a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work with everybody, especially today, in today's modern age of technology and data and all that sort of stuff. It's about striking the balance and the relationship with those athletes. And to be quite honest, I wasn't aware of that as much as I am now. I now work with one of the athletes I used to formerly coach, Kelly Hetherington, who was national 800-metre champion. I was working with her in the sort of latter part of her career. And now she actually works for our company, Elite Wellbeing, and assists me with the coaching business that we have. And just in reflection on some of the coaching bits and pieces that I had with her, she said I was an arsehole. The way I spoke to her and how I would be demeaning in my mannerisms towards her when I was coaching her. And I didn't know that. And I only found that out in having those conversations now. So one of the big things that I do every year now is meet with my athletes, and I meet them every week anyway, but in an environment where they can talk to me about how they'd like me to do it differently, what they didn't like about how I approached their season. And it is their season. And I think that's one of the other challenges is understanding it's no longer about me. It's about providing something for these guys because it's their journey. They only get it once. And as coaches, you might coach 100 athletes in your career, maybe more, I don't know, but it's making sure that what you're doing is for them rather than for yourself. And that's been one of the biggest learning experiences for me. And I'm constantly evolving in that space. And I think you'd be silly if you didn't, as a coach, and understand what's required for each of your athletes. And that's no more relevant than today in regards to the situation that everybody around the world is in. And And I think in building that environment, that trust, that buy-in, and that community within the group and within your coaching relationships is even more important today in this online world that we're stuck in at the moment than it has ever been. So it's always evolving, and it's constantly changing. And I'll always learn from the athletes, because at the end of the day, they're your direct feedback. They're the ones that you're working with, and you need to take that on board.
One last question for you about yourself. If you had the opportunity to step back in time and coach yourself when you were, let's say, 19, as you were sort of breaking through and going towards Olympics, what are 3 key things you'd tell yourself?
If I knew what I knew now, I'd probably try to tell myself to enjoy it more. I enjoyed that sort of 18, 19, 20-year-old bracket around the Sydney Olympics. It was more of an experience than anything else. So I'd tell myself enjoyment, take in the moment, and don't be so focused on the result. Try to relax and enjoy the experience and just let it happen. Try and take more people with me on the adventure. I was very focused, as I've already spoken about, in regards to traveling. So try and include more people in that process. What's the third one? What would I tell myself? I was pretty confident, so I wouldn't say I'm going to tell myself to be more confident. Probably be more relaxed, I think, in the way I approached certain things. I could be quite high strung. But all of these things I've learned as I've matured. I'm now nearly 40, so it's very difficult to tell an 18-year-old, 19-year-old young athlete that has aspirations to be the best in the world those things. So yeah, up there probably. And don't help Mo Farah when he's a young junior developing athlete. Just let him figure it out. No. I'm only staring at that last one's a joke.
Yeah, no, very good. I just wanted to throw in a couple of questions that were sent in before we finish up. How does the current crop of long distance runners look leading into Tokyo? How do you feel with that? You're obviously coaching Madeline Heiner. How do you feel she might go in the next 12 months? And what do you like about the Australian distance runners going forward?
Well, I think we've got good depth in the junior ranks, but one of the challenges we've always had is getting them to then be able to go and compete internationally. And I think on the women's side, we're going really well. We're very strong, in particular in the sort of longer distances. So up in the marathon, we've got multiple athletes that are competitive in the major competitions. And also the major city marathons around the world. Obviously, the ones you work with, Jess, is returning from having a baby and all those sort of things. But my expectation for those athletes is that they'll continue to improve and get stronger. And obviously, having another 12 months sounds good in theory, but can be challenging depending on what part of your career you're in for our older athletes. But for our younger athletes, it's really an exciting time because they're able to focus on going back and doing some real groundwork throughout this period without the stress of competition and selection at this point. So I think our women are really strong. Our men, obviously we've got some good talent in that 1500 through to 5K. Obviously in the 5K in particular with Stewie, he's very strong, very competitive. He's now getting that ammunition to be able to compete and make finals and then do some damage in the finals. I'm looking forward to watching that. The 1500 space is really interesting. Obviously, Ryan Gregson and Jeff Risley and these sort of athletes are at the back end of their career now. So I'll be interested to see how they hang on for another 12 months going into Tokyo. And then on the flip side of that, what our younger athletes coming in can do over the next 12 months. It's going to be really interesting. And Madeline, she's going really well. It's actually been a blessing for her this extra time, given the situation at the moment. As you know, you coached her to some of her great successes earlier on in her career. She's now a mature athlete, and she's overcome some significant challenges in the last 12 months through injuries and other various bits and pieces in her life that have presented some challenges. But she's in a really good space now, and she's able to train injury-free, interruption-free, and we're just taking it nice and slowly, building up a solid base and a really good foundation, which had the Olympics been in sort of 6 weeks from now, we wouldn't have been able to do. So we're able to go back now and just create that solid base that she needs. And then just like everybody else, we go through the selection process and and see where everything falls in sort of Jan, Feb, March next year. And we'll look at things like World Cross, if they happen in Australia, and then the other competitions that obviously are going to happen over the next, throughout 2021, 20 and 2022. It's going to be a really busy year for all of our athletes in international competition, subject to what evolves and what happens from an event space.
Excellent, Craig. Well, thank you very much for your time this morning. Really appreciate your insights into, one, your own career, two, into your coaching, and in giving us some thoughts on what's happening with long distance running in Australia. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. See you later.